Sukan Commonwealth 2022. Semua ini hanya RM129 sebulan bersama Astro Fiber 50 Mbps. Anda juga dapat satu router Wi-Fi 6 dan satu mesh percuma untuk Wi-Fi kencang. Maklumat lanjut di astrofiber.com.my.
Perkhidmatan perubatan di seluruh negara memerlukan 2,000 beg darah setiap hari. Mengikut tinjauan, hanya 2.5% penduduk Malaysia mendermakan darah. Bagi setiap beg darah yang diperolehi, ia mampu menyelamatkan 3 nyawa. Kami perlukan darah anda. Jom derma darah.
Hello and good evening. I'm Melissa Idris. Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. The Anti-Sexual Harassment Bill is passed in Dewan Rakyat today. It provides the right to redress for any person who has been sexually harassed, and it expands legal options for survivors by creating a special closed-door tribunal with powers to order a range of remedies, including monetary compensation, issuing an apology, and counselling. So what needs to happen next for proper implementation and compliance? Joining us now is Kasturi Patu. She's the MP for Batu Kawan. Kasturi, a historic bill passed in Dewan Rakyat today, only slightly marred, I must say, by the sexism that was demonstrated by several parliamentarians. Can we begin our conversation today by you sharing how you're digesting what happened in the proceedings in the Dewan earlier today?
Thanks, Melissa. I'm elated, of course, that the Sexual Harassment Bill has finally been passed in Parliament. I was 6 years old when activists started to talk about it and the need for Malaysia to have its own standalone bill. I'm 43 today and privileged to take part in the debate to make sure that this historical moment will be witnessed by everyone. Of course, it's not a perfect bill. No bills are perfect. There is plenty of room for improvement, but I think we believe collectively that it was important to pass a bill first in Parliament and along the way put in the necessary amendments, because laws are living, they're not cast in stone, and we hope that it is not just us, but then in generations to come that the bill will be strengthened, the bill will be tightened, to follow progress in time, that it will provide the adequate protection that it needs to, and the deterrence and the punishment for perpetrators.
Wonderful. Let's come back to the bill in just a little bit. I do want to address what happened in Dewan today with the comments that were made today and also yesterday. And I'm just wondering, when legislators get away with making sexist remarks, whether perniciously or whether explicitly, it sends a message that, Parliament accepts this type of behavior. Kasturi, what do you think are some of the consequences of sexism in Parliament?
Oh, I think that it sets a very bad image and impression to people and to the public, particularly young men and women who see themselves as future leaders of the country, who are passionate to be elected reps, who see themselves one day as a member of Parliament. And also, it creates a lot of distrust among the public when they look at parliamentarians bickering about small things and small issues compared to what's the bigger issue out there. Like in this case, it was to ensure that we successfully debate and pass the Anti-Sexual Harassment Bill. But it was indeed a moment of madness, I think, for lack of a better word, for the MP for Pasir Salak, because he just came in guns a-blazing, and he invoked a standing order and just started to attack MPs one by one. We are quite used to this kind of behavior by Pasir Salak and MPs like him. But today, I think he crossed the line. First, and ironically, while we are debating an anti-sexual harassment bill, made a blanket statement that DAP female MPs were tidak senonoh, or vulgar in other words, which was shocking. and then he went on with the microphone off to use a bad word in the House, and he repeated it at least twice, 3 times to opposition MPs. I saw it. We have at least 8 witnesses who saw him and heard him make this statement.
Right.
So of course,
and I guess the question is what repercussions to that. I know that this is not the first time this has happened, but what we're seeing is that there are repeat offenders in Parliament who often breach the decorum in Dewan, who are more often than not likely to be older male MPs. Do you think that there's adequate disciplinary sanctions that are commensurate with the sexism and sometimes the racism that we hear in Dewan Rakyat?
No, I think there's also plenty of room for that to be improved. Now, let's remember that many years ago, the Standing Order of Parliament was amended to include amongst unparliamentary language to include the word sexism. So this was done when YB Chong Ing was the MP, YB Nurul Izzah, a few of our female MPs approached the Speaker and urged the Speaker to amend the standing orders to include the word sexist remarks. So we do have that under the provision 36(4) of the standing orders, that any MP found to have made sexist remarks must be dealt with. However, having said that, we also have the Standing Committee on Rights and Privileges. So any MP found to have breached these standing orders, another MP can write in or put in a motion to the Speaker to refer the MP to the Rights and Privileges Committee in Parliament. Now, it's like a small tribunal where the MP can then defend him or herself. I actually said this, I mean this, etc. Now, let's not forget that in 2020, the MP for Baling said that I was gelap and asked me to use bedak in Parliament. Now, after that incident, I wrote into the Speaker's office to propose an amendment to the standing order that an MP found to have breached or have used unparliamentary language, no decorum, sexist or racist in nature, must be fined by the Parliament. And this is according to the Parliament Act, a minimum of 500 ringgit. But it has been 2 years and I have not seen any move or progress on it. I think this sort of action translates very widely when it's picked up by the press to say that this MP has been fined a certain amount of money for using sexist language or racist language. But in relation to the Sexual Harassment Bill, there remains a question whether or not these kind of MPs are also subject to action using the Sexual Harassment Bill or the Sexual Harassment Act when it becomes law one day, because we do have immunity in Parliament. So there was this question that was posed by many MPs. The Minister did not have time to address it because there were many other issues that were raised. However, she did say that she will reply in writing to us.
Well, we'll keep an eye out for that written reply. And one of the things that struck me, Kasturi, during the debate was actually several MPs highlighted this lack of awareness about what constitutes sexual harassment. And there seems to be a lot of concern. There seemed to be a lot of concern about not being able to make jokes anymore, what you can and cannot say, particularly to women. Can you comment on that in terms of what was what was raised in the debates around the Anti-Sexual Harassment Bill, and perhaps how that reflects as legislators the awareness of of sexual harassment, and now we have this bill with the hopes of preventing or curbing sexual harassment?
Yes, there were some comments about what constitutes as sexual harassment, but many MPs did not go into great detail about it, which of course brings to my next point that there has to be gender sensitization session or a course for MPs. It doesn't mean that if no MPs or less MPs raised it in Parliament that we don't actually have a problem. Some of them just chose not to debate and not to speak about it. But we did have MPs who still brought the issue of dress code, who found a way to bring this into the discussion of sexual harassment. And it is almost like the subject of talking about rape victims. It's often what was he or she wearing, it's often where was he or she at, and whether he or she did something to ask for it. And you can more or less apply all these three examples on sexual harassment cases as well. But of course, even the definition of it in the bill, I think can be tightened a bit more, because it does say that according to a reasonable decision, meaning that, and that's very subjective. So if something that I feel sexually harassed by this action, this look, this treatment, this language, this sound that you're making, the perpetrator could say, oh, but it was absolutely innocent on my side. So that is a little bit of a lacuna there, the definition which we have proposed for the government to look into, to tighten that definition. But of course, it's over time, we hope to be able to reach out to more MPs, but MPs also have to commit to attending this course, or attending these sessions that we're going to have, or we hope to see Parliament organizing.
Well, let's hope we make it mandatory for all MPs. Kasturi, last question for you. I want to ask, because you said in the beginning that it's not a perfect law, it's not a perfect bill. Is it better to pass an imperfect bill, an imperfect law, and perfect it along the way, as opposed to not passing it at all? And I'm just wondering, because you've been following all the different provisions with the Anti-Sexual Harassment Bill, are you happy with this version of the bill? Is there anything, as you said, you'd like to make better?
Yes, I think, well, I'm not jumping for joy that the bill has been passed, but I must commend the government. I think it was all the pressure of tabling this bill in Parliament that has made them make this decision that it has to be now, or else MPs and civil society and the public at large would be pressuring them and holding them accountable and responsible as to why there is this delay. Having said that, there are some improvements I wish to see. I think some definitions of who sits in the tribunal, who sits in the committee, how they are appointed, those kind of things actually make a lot of difference, because it is this group of men and women who are going to be sitting at this decision-making level or reporting level that we are going to greatly depend on. If you have a committee that does not report properly on sexual harassment cases or follow-ups of what companies are doing, private companies, government entities, agencies, then you are back to square one and just as well not have a bill. No, I do agree with your concern and the concern of many Malaysians, whether or not we should have a bill that is lukewarm or whether we should have one that is robust and tight and vibrant. I think that at this point, looking at how bills are retabled in Parliament after amendments, it takes a very long time. The Malaysian Parliament sits for 70 to 75 to 80 days a year, which means that if you miss this chance in this session, very likely it will be the next. But the next session in October, the focus is on the budget and other quite hot bills that might be tabled at that time. And if you miss the end of the year session, then it's next year, March, April. So we also have this issue of time and the fact that we only sit 3 times a year, and it has to go through this grueling process through the AG's office, consultation with CSOs, with MPs again, with all stakeholders, and I think that would just drag it longer. So I think that the way forward would be, of course, today to table this bill. It's historical, and along the way to be open to suggestions. And I think consultations must not end here. In fact, it is after this that they have to up the game and up the ante on consultations, on discussing with stakeholders, on women NGOs, MPs, enforcement officers, the judiciary, the media especially. I think we also spoke about how media should be reporting sexual harassment cases. We should never bring about the attention to the victim, but to the case itself. So I think that there is room for improvement, engagement, and to explore using best practices from other countries, how we can move forward on this.
Kasturi, thank you for joining us on the show tonight. That was Kasturi Pato, MP of Batu Kawan. We're going to take a quick break here and consider this. We will be back with more. Stay tuned.
Magnum Belgian Chocolate Lux Baharu, aiskrim coklat ungu, coklat Belgium tebal, dan cebisan biskut rangup.
Seems to be the ideal.
Magnum, kenikmatan sejati.
COVID-19 memperlihatkan kepada kita betapa pantasnya adaptasi teknologi di kalangan PKS kita. Niaga AWANI dan Unified Business akan menyelami perjalanan kebangkitan semula PKS kita melalui segmen Jiwa SME setiap Selasa dan Khamis untuk inspirasi anda.
Transformasikan perniagaan dengan Unified Business, rakan digital pilihan anda. Hubungi kami sekarang dan jimat sehingga 50%. Jom Unified Business.
She's feisty and she's queen on demand. Express from China. She's a tough cookie with a cute side. But no one stands in her way. The legendary life of Queen Now, exclusively on demand. Stream via Ultrabox and Astro Go app.
Hai, bertemu kembali dalam dunia Wi-Fi kencang. Dunia yang menyatukan keluarga dengan rancangan tak putus-putus. Teruskan riang di setiap ruang dengan Chicago Fire musim 10. Karaoke Superstar. Jodohku Babysitter.
Yang buat aku kena buang kerja.
Bergelak tawa dengan Running Man.
Good, buruk.
Atau saksikan BWF Malaysia Masters dan Sukan Commonwealth 2022. Semua ini hanya RM129 sebulan bersama Astro Fiber 50 Mbps. Anda juga dapat satu router Wi-Fi 6 dan satu mesh percuma untuk Wi-Fi kencang. Maklumat lanjut di astrofiber.com.my.
Hi, you're watching Consider This. I'm Melissa Idris. Dewan Rakyat today voted to pass the Anti-Sexual Harassment Bill, a legislation some 30 years in the making. Joining us now is Betty Yeo, she's a consultant for Engender, and Lillian Kok, Program Officer at the All Women's Action Society, or better known as AWAM. They were both part of the Special Project Task Force that was set up by the Ministry of Women, Family and Community Development in 2019 to provide input in drafting the bill. Lillian, Betty, you're both part of the Anti-Sexual Harassment Bill advocacy group, and you guys have been pushing to make the bill the best version that it can be. But now that it's passed, I'm sure there is some sense of victory. I'm just wondering whether there is also a sense of trepidation, because, you know, a few months ago, the group proposed some improvements to the bill. I'm just wondering what you make of this version of the bill. Betty, if I may begin with you.
Sure. What do I think about this? After 30 years, I'm speechless. While we are happy that the bill is now passed, I think it's just the beginning. Yeah, it's an end of a phrase and it's a beginning. And there's a lot of work for us to do now to ensure that whatever that is in the gaps that is not fulfilled can be carried on in whatever possible ways by working together with the ministry and any other parties concerned.
Right. And Lillian, what about you? Is an imperfect law better than no law?
Since it's been such a long time already, I would say that there is no reason for the public should wait any longer to have access to better reporting avenues and protection against sexual harassment. So, having said that, we are optimistic that tabling the bill now indicates readiness by the ministry to implement and institutionalize the bill. And it also creates opportunities for the public as well as organizations to talk about it, to create discourse about the topic of sexual harassment and thus create awareness.
Right. Well, there certainly was a lot of discourse in Parliament today, and I think that perhaps sets the tone for how this bill might be received once it is enacted into law. Can we talk a little bit about some of the ways in which the bill the law might be enhanced. Now, one of the provisions for organizations' duty of care, that's to address and prevent sexual harassment, that hasn't been included in the bill. And I understand that it will instead be outlined in government regulations. I'd like to understand a little bit better why it is important to have this, to have organizations address their duty of care to prevent sexual harassment. Betty?
Well, as you can see, most of us work at least 1/3 of our life in workplaces. And other times we are spent in all the other organizations and all. So the organization actually is the place that we are most likely to be faced with sexual harassment. So if an organization is not conducive, if the people and the environment is toxic and creates sexual harassment, that's one of the first place that we need to know what can be done. So if organizational duties are included, everyone has a very basic foundation of what they need to do, especially companies who have no inkling where to start. These organizational duties will help them formulate steps in which they can take to ensure a place that is safe and to prevent sexual harassment from happening. Everyone can be on the same page and knows what to do. So that's why it's important that organizational duties is in the bill. Since it's not in the bill, we definitely look forward to guidelines to be more comprehensive now that we can do a draft of the guidelines and hope that it will provide the necessary space and people to feel comfortable and work without any sexual harassment.
Okay, well, these guidelines, I mean, it really needs to be comprehensive. Hannah, you in the debates highlighted concern that perhaps the guidelines need to be implemented well to prevent gender segregation. So, you know, overzealous enforcement might force genders to separate to prevent sexual harassment, moral policing of people's clothing. Lillian, what needs to happen next to ensure that the guidelines on organizational duty of care is properly addressed and is effectively adopted?
So right now we have to go with the normalization of creating safe spaces against sexual harassment in all organizations, regardless if it's a working space or not. And as well, the normalization that sexual harassment is not specifically a women's issue, but a violation against human rights. So as Betty mentioned, most of our time is spent in the workplace, and in the workplace, it's not just necessarily women that suffers from sexual harassment, it is the male workers as well. So we can do that by increasing awareness in the definition of sexual harassment in organizations via workshops and awareness forums. We can support organizations as a coalition to provide information and knowledge on the definition of sexual harassment, active bystanding, and how to manage an incident. And we also, and also as NGOs, we can be instrumental in monitoring and evaluation.
All right, that's interesting because the monitoring and evaluation is also important. Betty, is there a danger if this very important part of sexual harassment prevention is left up to government to create guidelines with no input from CSOs or other stakeholders? Is there, I guess I'm wondering, what is the danger if there is no consultation or the consultation does not continue after this?
I guess one of the things that we can say is hopefully that does not happen. But when there is lack of communication or intervention or engagement with all parties, you do not know the exact condition that's on the ground. So it's only when you engage with people. A very good example is companies or some of the employers people will say that we don't need these kind of things. It's not necessary. But on the other hand, we are hearing other companies who say, what is wrong with the government? Why are they not implementing it? We as organizations are already implementing it. So it's only when you engage, you get to hear different views, give you extra different ideas. And sometimes it's these simple ideas that is provided that helps the other party to understand the situation. I think it's very important that community understand, not just the organization. The whole community needs to have the spirit of the law, as what was said in the parliament, to be able to put into practice what we are now calling for.
Right. The spirit of the law is definitely important, but also some semantics and the phrasing of the law is equally as important. There was some concerns that the definition of sexual harassment in the bill was not extended enough. Do you share their concerns, Lillian?
Indeed, the definition section is something of an interest for us even since from the beginning, and we are keen to see that some of the MPs from all across political parties raise similar legitimate concerns regarding the issue about the definition of the bill to encompass a more survivor-centric coverage. So moving forward, we will see how this bill can further improve on the definition.
Okay. Well, one of the things that struck me was not just the definition of the bill, but often raised in the debates was confusion or a general lack of awareness of what constitutes sexual harassment even. And I do wonder what needs to be done, because it's not just limited to our parliamentarians, but also to the wider public. So what now needs to be done to educate the wider public about the bill and the issues that it aims to address and the rights for redress that it provides any person who has been a victim of sexual harassment. And I'm just wondering who should take the lead here. Betty, how do you feel about what needs to happen next in terms of education regarding this bill?
I think education is not just the Ministry of Women. Yeah. I think this is an area in which the Ministry of Education can play a role. We have been seeing over the years gender-based violence being perpetrated, and sexual harassment is just one of these gender-based violence. And all of these are linked to control position, violation of rights. Maybe within our education system, we should start talking about these kind of violations to the human rights, to the gender-based violence, so that from young, we already start educating them. Don't wait till until they are old and you cannot change their habits, you cannot change their mindset. So let's introduce it from there. But at this point of time, with a new bill, yes, definitely a lot of education awareness has to be created, whether it's by the ministry or with NGO. Everyone has to play a role now.
Lillian, can I ask, because I know you do a lot of work with the public in creating awareness, in educating about the issues around sexual harassment and prevention of sexual harassment. What is your sense of how much buy-in you will need from the public, and how do we ensure that we get that buy-in?
Currently, in the past recent years, there is more awareness and more willingness for the public to be open and talk about sexual harassment and trying to understand what constitutes as sexual harassment. So we should try to continue to increase these spaces to talk and discuss, and of course to like as I mentioned just now, to help people try to manage incidences of sexual harassment, not just in act as well, but in terms of emotional and psychological support. And when we continue to have these discussions, it's in schools, in the workplace, in public spaces, as what AWANI is doing, we hope that we can create sensitization when we talk about this kind of when we talk about issues of sexual harassment, and by that we hope to also normalize the conversation, normalize how we manage sexual harassment, so that we will stop seeing it as a joke right now, and we will take it more seriously and have better understanding in order to manage it.
Do you think that now with the tribunal, sexual harassment survivors will be more open to sharing their stories, or to seek for redress, Lillian?
I guess.
Betty, you can too if you want.
And then, I guess that having a tribunal is a step forward because the way of burden of proof is not as high as in the court. But nonetheless, I think there still have to be mechanism that allows the women to come out and speak in confidence. That means how do you support these women? Because as Lillian has pointed out, it's not just the harassment, but it's the after effect on the psychological impact. And one thing people need to understand, sexual harassment is just not women. It's also men, it's also children, and it affects not just the person concerned, it affects the family when it happens. So that's something that everyone needs to be aware of. Lillian?
Well, unfortunately, we've run out of time, and I do want to thank both of you for being on the show, and congratulations after a long struggle to get this bill tabled and passed. You saw this happen today. Betty Yeo and Lillian Kok from the Anti-Sexual Harassment Bill Advocacy Group, wrapping up this episode of Consider This. I'm Melissa Idris, signing off for this evening. Thank you so much for watching, and good night.